It is the Medicines and Substances Act. And the Act basically says that we are to conduct effective and efficient as well as ethical assessment of the products that we oversee as a regulator. And that the work we do must be fair and transparent, and that it must be timeous. Our Medicines Act also enables us to cooperate with other regulatory authorities, as I've indicated. In the Hazardous Substances Act, that's an act largely for regulation of radiation-emitting products, and it indicates the types of products that we then evaluate. The reason why we have two acts is because in the past, before SAHPRA was established in 2018, the work of radiation control used to sit in a different directorate within the Ministry of Health. So we're still in the process of combining all of these. So in terms of who do we then regulate? So we regulate the activities that lead to these products being available. So we regulate the manufacturing, the wholesaling, the distribution, the import, and the export of all health products. Then the products, as I've said, that we regulate are medicines. This includes complementary medicines. It includes even medicines that contain cannabis, because cannabis is a scheduled substance. So any scheduled substance has to be regulated by us. And then medical devices, radiation medical devices, as well as in vitro diagnostic tests. Quite important is that all the establishments that we license must have acceptable quality assurance principles that they comply with, as well as good manufacturing, good distribution practices, as we would then determine as a regulatory authority. Then what we also do is we inspect the facilities that manufacture, that do the wholesaling, facilities that conduct clinical trials, and also we inspect the manufacturers for pharmacovigilance, good pharmacovigilance practices. So basically, when you have a market authorization, it is incumbent on you as a manufacturer that you must monitor the product along its life cycle. And monitoring, it refers to also looking at any vigilance reporting. So whether it's adverse drug reactions or any malfunctioning of equipment, if it's a medical device, or any quality defects if it is a medicine. So in terms of the kind of full scope, we would, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Apologies. So in terms of the full scope, we would then have the product that is registered, and we call the company that it's registered to, we call them the holder of certificate of registration. They would typically, so they would have a product registration, but you cannot have a product registration if you're not licensed, because we need to know, how are you going to operate? Are you going to operate as a manufacturer? Are you going to operate as an importer, etc.? So they have to have a license and then the product registration. We also then have wholesalers who then must have a good wholesaling practice license. Then in South Africa and in most countries, actually, you would then have the pharmacies, which the oversight authority there would be a pharmacy council. So we've got in South Africa the Pharmacy Council that then ensures compliance with good pharmacy practice guidelines. And then, as I said, we monitor the product over its life cycle. So if it's a product that is imported into South Africa, we would then monitor it when it comes into the country. We would need to monitor it when it's in the country, and we would need to get any vigilance, pharmacovigilance reports. We also, and every authority does this, we're supposed to do post-market surveillance, which means you collect samples in the market and you test them and you see that they remain to be compliant, particularly from a quality perspective. So many of you may have seen what we call product recalls, where we say a certain product needs to come off the shelves. There's different stages of recall. We would also, in some instances, have products that would need to be withdrawn because of any, largely withdrawals are because of safety concerns. And then we would also issue what we call enforcements if the facility is not compliant. So one area, for example, that has been topical in South Africa, for example, is a recall we did of a very common product called Citra soda, wherein there were quality defects that we noted. And as I say, many countries do this. And when we do it, we would publish these product recalls. So in terms of what do we do when there is any non-compliance? So we then have jurisdiction to oversee the supply chain of products. So we've got inspectors who have the authority to go and inspect facilities. And if there's non-compliance, as I say, recall the product. Also at the ports of entry, so before the products enter the country or before they leave the country, we need to make sure that there's compliance with the regulations. And as I said, post-market surveillance is quite important because this is what ensures that the product that you have authorized is indeed the product that is available in country. So you would compare the product characteristics to what the applicant submitted in their dossier. The other important thing is that we are to also monitor how these products are advertised and promoted. We've got very strict rules in South Africa around what can be advertised, what can't be. So any product that is Schedule 3 and higher, sometimes for some products that are even at Schedule 2, they cannot be advertised. So if when, watching the television in South Africa or whichever platform, you see medicines being advertised, it's mostly the low risk medicines that are Schedule 2 or Schedule 1s. And then wherein, again, there's a non-compliance globally, there's what we call a rapid alert. So you don't only issue the recall or the alert in your country, you notify other countries through this rapid alert, understanding that products are made available in different countries. I've spoken around the recalls and the withdrawals to say this is when, there is non-compliance or the product doesn't meet the quality specifications. Okay, so what does the process of having a product registered look like? So you would submit your dossier to us. In the past, we used to use paper, we used to use CDs, but now we have a digital platform where you then submit this. But I thought I'll reflect on this because it's not so long ago that we were getting dossiers on memory sticks or CDs. Actually, in 2019, 2020, that's how we were receiving dossiers. But now there is a digital platform that we went live with as at April of last year. And then on the platform, your dossier would be screened to say, does it have everything that it needs to have? So it's what we call an administrative screening. Is everything that's supposed to be in the dossier there? Then we do, inspectorate would then verify the information that you've submitted, and there will be a visit to the site where you're manufacturing this product. If you are registering a product from a site that already has authorization, we just do a desktop evaluation. We will then also evaluate the product for clinical as well as quality sections of the dossier. So we look at, does the data support what you're claiming in terms of its health benefits, so to say. We would look at the clinical benefit risk. We look at the quality aspects. Is there compliance, with good manufacturing practices? Do you not have excipients in there that could be harmful? All of that. And then we issue a decision. So that's the process that it takes. And for innovative products, so these are new chemical entities, at the moment, the process takes about 350 working days. For generics, it takes 250 working days for us to evaluate these products and arrive at a regulatory decision, which is an approval or a non-approval. There is also mechanisms that people can access medicines that are not registered. In South Africa, we call it Section 21. So basically, it's the section of our Act that says that if there are products that are required and these products are registered in other countries, how can those in South Africa access these products? So the healthcare practitioner will submit an application to SAHPRA and motivate why any other product that's not in country is not cannot be utilized, and why a different product that's registered elsewhere should be utilized. Also, this framework applies for veterinary medicines as well as complementary medicines. So it's all types of medicines. And then I made reference to medical devices and IVDs. So we regulate these. At the moment, we have not started with product registrations where you send us the dossier. It's more the licensing of the facility as GMP compliant facilities. So when you make medical devices available, you can get 3 licenses. You're either a manufacturer, a distributor, or wholesaler. And as a manufacturer, typically you would also pack, label, import, or export. A distributor can also have a license that includes importation or exportation. And then a wholesaler, typically they would store and transport and deliver. Then the other category is biological medicines. So these are either monoclonal antibodies or blood-derived products. And so very similar to medicines there, in that we would evaluate the dossier in a very similar way that we do any other medicines, just that we've got a dedicated team that looks at biological medicines. Complementary medicines, so this is just a categories. We would oversee aromatherapy type products, Ayurveda, homeotherapy, traditional Chinese medicines, Unani, as well as Western herbal medicines. We're currently busy with a guideline for African traditional medicines to also then be included under the category of complementary medicines. And at the moment, we're not registering these products. We're busy now with the regulations for that. What we do is we license the facilities that manufacture and make these products available. So we call these products category D. So these are complementary medicines that include traditional disciplines that are not indigenous to South Africa. And again, as I said, we are developing a framework for medicines, for African traditional medicines. I've made reference to veterinary medicines, very similar to human medicines. The one element, though, here is that we've got another regulatory authority in the country within the Department of Agriculture that oversees some of the products within the veterinary space. But similarly to human medicines, they would go through the same evaluation process, and we've got guidelines and regulations for that. Then in terms of radiation control, these are, products that have ionizing radiation and used for medical or clinical purposes. So these, for example, will be have to then be regulated by SAHPRA. So either these are electronic generators that are used for medicinal applications, or products that emit radioactive material, or the actual radioactive materials being utilized as radiopharmaceuticals. So that also falls within the scope of SAHPRA. And so then the core thing here is that we need to ensure that we protect the patient, that they're not exposed to radiation unnecessarily. You all are aware of some of the concerns and risks with the use of radiation. So we need to ensure that the public is safe when either they consume these products or these products are used to diagnose them, and that those who use them also are protected. I've spoken earlier around pharmacovigilance, but it's important to note that once you get a product registration, it is incumbent on you as the manufacturer, as the holder of the certificate of registration, to make sure that you monitor your product and assess whether it has any ADRs, adverse drug reactions. And some of these ADRs would have been reported when you submitted your dossier or picked up during a clinical trial, but some may not be. because your numbers in a clinical trial may not, or that event may not have occurred because either it's a rare event, etc. So every manufacturer has what we call a risk management plan, and it speaks to how they will monitor their products' vigilance. Clinical trials is another area that we oversee, and here we've got a guideline again that speaks to how these studies must be submitted, what it is that we look for, but also we evaluate bioequivalence studies, particularly when you're using human participants. Bioequivalence studies, we see a lot of them because this is where, for example, when a generic is being compared with an originator product, and the applicant wants to demonstrate that these products are equivalent regarding their pharmacokinetics. We do have in South Africa what we call the South African Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, and they provide investigators and researchers with clarity on what needs to be put in place to ensure that you conduct a clinical trial that does not affect the participants' safety. So there's a whole guideline around that. And it's not only for investigators for products, that would be registered, because we know that many of the products that may undergo clinical trial may not necessarily be approved. So what are some of the pitfalls that we are seeing with new entrants? The first is that they may select a wrong pathway. Hence, I spend time just to say these are the different instruments that we have. One of the other important requirements for us in South Africa is that you must have a company that is registered in South Africa. And the reason that we do so is such that when we look at the pharmacovigilance or when we do post-market surveillance, there then has to be a responsible pharmacist who then tackles these issues and would be responsible to ensure that wherein there is any adverse drug reactions or product quality, they then take the responsibility. So we need to have a company domiciled in South Africa. The other pitfall is around incomplete dossiers. We know that dossiers are, even though now they're electronic, we're using an ECTD. It is a lot to put together. They have 5 modules, and the bulkiest really of modules are module 4 and module 3 that look at the clinical and the non-clinical data. So there's a lot of data that goes into that. So what we found is that sometimes the dossier is not complete, and then now that we've automated the dossier submission, it will then pass the validation, what we call the validation test, and will then not come through the system. So it is important that you check your dossier, have a look at our guidelines, and make sure all the information that's there is there, and it is also in the right format. The other pitfall that we see is that people could be manufacturing at sites that do not meet good manufacturing practice standards. And so when we go and we inspect, they're non-compliant, or that the site may not be ready and is not at a GMP status yet. So that's quite important. And my advice is that when you know that you'll be manufacturing a product if it's a new site, consult with the regulator in your country to say what would they require, look at their guidelines, etc. If it's a site that already makes other products, you need to understand whether that facility does have a GMP certificate or not, because we would then, if they do have, the regulatory authority would recognize that. What we've also found is that there's weak supply chain control. So when the product moves maybe from a manufacturer to a wholesaler, there could be some non-compliance, or when it moves to the pharmacy, there's non-compliance. So here it's important that the quality of the product is maintained. As I said, we do conduct post-market surveillance, which is where we collect samples and we test them, but also every importer has to do what we call a post-import testing. So that's to say, when the product was shipped, say, from India to South Africa, during that transportation, you can then have confidence that there were no quality defects by conducting a test of this product when it arrives in country. What we're also seeing, and maybe not too relevant for ourselves, but that we're seeing some misuse of Section 21, wherein people are, instead of having products registered, they want to make them available through Section 21. And really, Section 21 is supposed to be for compassionate use for those very specific cases wherein there is no alternative available. Another pitfall is a post-market plan. As I said, we insist on this, that there must be a plan of how you will monitor the product over its life cycle. So we need a plan for pharmacovigilance. We need your own plan of how you will do post-market surveillance. So all these activities post-authorization are so critical that, and it's because at the end of the day, this is what the public interfaces with. They interface with your product when it's being accessed through a pharmacy. So we need to know that you've got quality built into that. When they are then consuming the product, if there's any adverse drug reactions, they need to know who to report to. So that's why in South Africa, on the product package, we insist that there's a label that indicates who the manufacturer is, where they're based, and provides their details so that the public can engage with them. We also have what we call patient leaflets that you find in the boxes of the medicines, but now we also have this on an online format, and we are also discussing with industry to say, instead of having the labeling details written on the package, we can have a QR code. People can scan the QR code and get all that information. And then the regulatory space changes quite a lot. So it's important that you keep up with what are the new developments, new regulations, or new regulatory updates. So constantly checking, are there any new guidelines, are there any new regulations is of importance, so that when you make your submission, you then have the most current information. So just to conclude on this part is to say, please do engage with the regulatory authority. You need to do so early. Many of us regulatory authorities have mechanisms to for what we call pre-submission meetings, where you can engage with the regulator, understand what their requirements are, and that certainly helps in making the process a lot more seamless. So for me, that will be a core message that I would like to leave you with, to say, engage with the regulator. Even if you don't engage with them in person or virtually, engage with the information that's available on their websites, etc. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope this was helpful. I'm happy to pause here and maybe take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tumi, for your presentation. This is really insightful. So I have a question, and this is with regards to the submission process. So I know you've talked about the classification of the solutions, and I'm wondering, like, for an innovator who is, who doesn't understand anything about the submission, is this regarding the classification? Is this information available to the public, even in your website, and also on the incomplete submissions? I was thinking, like, what, according to your experience from the innovators that you have dealt with before, what is the one thing that can make it incomplete?
Thank you. Do you want me to take those now?
Yeah, you can respond as we move.
Okay, thank you. So yes, our website does have all the information that is required. We update this quite regularly. we always try to make it, user friendly. It's not always easy because the regulatory data or guidelines are typically very technical in their nature. And so, yeah, we try our utmost to make them quite accessible. And then in terms of incomplete, usually it's incomplete data. So let's say it's a generic. We find that there's no bioequivalence data. So it really is around have all the data to demonstrate to the regulator that your product is safe, it's a quality product, and it's effective. The other thing that we see is outdated GMP certificates, because GMP certificates, every country has a validity period for GMP certificates, so we would check that. So just some examples there.
Okay, there's a question on the chat from Jeremy, and the question is, how does SAHPRA approach the challenges of registering or licensing new innovations that have not been anticipated by the regulatory framework, and they do not have a regulatory pathway for these new innovations?
Thank you. We see that a lot. I always say to my team, regulation actually follows innovation because you can't regulate what's not there. So if I look at, for example, one of the most recent products we are dealing with is AI, as a medical device. It had to be there for us to respond. But what we do is we quickly would develop guidelines. We don't operate alone. We operate, in a global sphere. So many of these, there's global committees, and it's helpful for us because a lot of the innovations, first go into the markets in the north, and then we can borrow from them and refine and adapt their requirements and their guidelines to our context. So collaborating with other regulators has helped a lot in ensuring that we quickly develop guidelines.
Okay, so I have another question. So for a regulator like SAHPRA, I know you've taken us through what you normally look into when you're evaluating the innovations. So I'm wondering, does that applies to different or other regulatory bodies within the continent, given that perhaps you must have an opportunity previously to interact with a regulator in Kenya, a regulator in West Africa. So do they look into the same things that you are looking into? That is my first question. The second question is on the clinical trials data. So what are you really looking into that will then help you in terms of making decisions whether to approve or reject a solution?
Thank you. So in terms of what other regulators are looking for, yeah, typically it's very similar, because we all comply with global standards. So for example, on the continent, it is South Africa, it is Egypt and Nigeria that are members of ICH, which is a global harmonization platform that provides guidelines on what to review, etc. There's also PICS, which is for pharmaceutical inspections that SAHPRA is a member of. And then we've got about 9 countries on the continent that are ML3. And that then says, we typically, we have systems and processes to evaluate dossiers at the same extent as what the global standards would require. So it typically is the same, particularly for safety, quality, and efficacy. You do have instances where we have what we call country-specific requirements. So if you're submitting a dossier for a product that maybe was developed in an area where the humidity levels are different to, say, here in South Africa, we would require that you do a stability study in conditions with the relative humidity similar to ours. So you'll find those country-specific requirements, but those, again, would be captured in our guidelines. In terms of clinical trials, if I understood your question correctly, I mean, what we need to be able to arrive at a decision to authorize a trial is preclinical safety data. There must be some data that says you've tested this product, whether it's in animal models or you've done some preclinical studies that says it's safe. And then if you want to do a phase 1 study, again, it's just looking at, is this product safe, in a smaller cohort of individuals. Then when you move to phase 2 and phase 3, that's where you start looking at safety and efficacy of the product.
Okay, thank you for that response. So there's another question on the chat. How does regulatory readiness differ across African markets, and what should innovators prioritize when entering multiple jurisdictions simultaneously?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variability, and it's not unique to our continent. You see it everywhere. Regulators have, depending on capacity and resources, it really, really varies. So as I say, on the continent, we've got 9 ML3 countries. And we have AMA, which is the African Medicines Agency, that has been now established and is operational. And it's a great platform because it will enable a single dossier submitted to AMA. And once AMA arrives at a scientific opinion, when you submit the dossier to the other countries, they can rely on the assessment that's done by AMA.
Okay, any other question from the audience? So as we wait for other questions, I also have another question. So what is the right time for an innovator to approach a regulator?
So, and apologies, I see the latter part of the other question I didn't adequately address. So you can certainly submit in multiple countries simultaneously. It really would be based on your company's strategy. But as I say, AMA is a great model. We also then have regional medicine harmonization initiatives that would do a review for the region. So, for example, for us in SADC, we've got a SADC MRH, wherein there's 16 countries that participate. So we would then do as a review under SADC, and once SADC MRH, or what we call Zazibona, issues a decision, you can then submit your dossier to the other countries, and those countries would then rely on a assessment conducted by Zazibona. Then in terms of the ideal time, that's difficult to say, but the key thing is you need to have some data, some preclinical data on the safety as well as the quality. Whereas all the other things in terms of, if you're still I guess in a research stage or development stage, you can find a lot on our website. We also try to attend quite a number of conferences, etc., to share with individuals what a regulatory pathway would be for specific type products.
Okay, I see a hand raised by Sangudi. Please unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Sangudi from Tanzania. I'm a co-founder of Sartan AI, whereby we're using AI for cervical cancer screening. So I have a question since my encounter with the regulatory authority in Tanzania. You mentioned something about, registered maybe a manufacturing facility. So for instance, if you're a software company that you are not manufacturing any drugs or anything except for software. So how does that work for software companies? Because the items that were given, it seems like most of them, they were describing a manufacturing facility for a drug or anything, but they didn't fit specifically for a software company. And then the other thing is, of course, we're required to present findings, research about our solution based on the AI. And also, I was kind of asking, which something didn't come clear to me is like if you are register maybe AI-based solution, you go first to the regulatory approval, and ask the kind of things that they are looking for your solution to be approved, or you do everything by yourself and then you take your result to the regulatory approval for you, to go through the regulatory approval process. So, which approach works best? Yeah, thank you so much.
No, thank you. Some excellent questions there. So yeah, so AI is an interesting one, right? And typically when you have a software, the software will be in some device. So we then need to know that that device has been manufactured according to quality standards. And in medical devices, ISO standards are what we would refer to. So it may not be GMP as per GMP in pharma, but it's largely ISO. And ISO, many organizations that manufacture comply with ISO, and there's different ISO standards depending on the product. Then again, what you would need to do is the validation of your software, which is where you need to ensure the sensitivity as well as the specificity. There are instances wherein you need to make sure that indeed that software is a medical device. And many of us regulators have got definitions of what a medical device is. And so you have to then just look at our act. In our case, we always look at what is the intended use of the product. So if the product is intended to arrive at a diagnostic decision, then we would say it is a medical device. So that is quite important. So I'm just quickly looking at our act. So if it diagnoses, if it monitors, if it's used for treatment or alleviation, etc., if it's supporting or sustaining life, etc. So it's important that you familiarize yourself with how the regulator would define that specific product. And as I say, many of us, I know with Tanzania, they do align themselves with the IMDRF, which is the International Medical Devices Regulatory Forum. So they would have probably a similar definition to us. And then in terms of what information should be available, so many of us regulators have guidelines. And now with AI, it would be easy for one to just quickly look and say, what does the SAHPRA guideline, say on a specific matter? What data is required, etc. So that is captured in the guidelines. And I would recommend that before you make a submission, you familiarize yourself with the guidelines for that specific product type.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, there's another question on the chat, and how should an innovator determine study size? Do you have guidelines for what sample size would be sufficient? Also, where you are developing guidelines for new innovations, what happens with the innovation? What does the timeline look like in these instances?
Sure. So again, an innovative product or new innovations, in some instances, they're not completely new, right? So let's take mRNA vaccines. Yes, the platform was a new platform, but these are vaccines. So when you're then submitting your application, you then need to say, what does the regulator need to see? What does the regulator evaluate when they're evaluating a vaccine? And maybe using an innovative platform, but it remains to be a vaccine. If you've got, like I say, a software as a medical device, you then need to look at our medical devices guideline and say, what does SAHPRA require for a medical device? And then you apply those to then your product. And then in terms of the sample sizes, again, this is in our guidelines, and a lot is determined by what your clinical outcome would be. You would need to then say, is the data that you will have statistically significant to then prove to the regulator that your product is effective or your product does what it says it does. I mean, typically phase 1 studies, 10, 20 individuals, because there you're looking at safety. Phase 2 studies, they start getting into the hundreds, so let's say 100 or so. Phase 3 studies are quite large. You need thousands of individuals, especially if it's a randomized clinical trial. So again, there's a guideline, and there's a lot of other industry associations that I would recommend that some of the new entrants maybe participate in, because through those industry fora, they have conferences, they've got approaches to assist you to get information. So with clinical trials, for example, in South Africa, we have SAHPRA, and SAHPRA has a lot of insight about what SAHPRA does and what we would typically ask for. So that's one thing I would certainly recommend. Affiliate yourself with the various associations. For medical devices in South Africa, there's MDMSA and there's SAMED. For generics, there's the GBMSA. I'm not trying to market them, but it's just to say there are associations wherein you can engage with like-minded people and they can assist you in the event that, some of our regulatory guidelines, etc., are a bit complex.
So there's also another question. Beyond compliance-based relationship, does SAHPRA have any programs for closer collaboration with innovators in promoting medical sector innovation? For example, are there any programs like innovation hubs and also regulatory sandboxes?
So not specifically for us as regulators, but we would participate or collaborate with those that have innovation hubs, etc. So, and that's typically how we work in South Africa. So, there is, for example, the innovation hub here in Pretoria. When they have workshops, etc., they would invite SAHPRA to say SAHPRA comes and presents to their incubators, and we can share what it is that what a regulatory pathway would be for some of the products. So we've done that a lot with incubators. Regulatory sandboxes we would typically apply when there is a product to be submitted. So this is now after the development stage, wherein we then have to determine as a regulator what the regulatory pathway would look like. I know, for example, one that we're thinking around is an AI regulatory sandbox. And we also regularly do pilots wherein we pilot with a handful of companies, particularly where we're trying out something that's new. Thanks.
Okay, I hope your question has been answered, Jeremy. Another question, what practical steps should MedTech startups take today to ensure their technical documentation is suitable for multiple African markets rather than a single country as they prepare for EU, MDR, and also US FDA?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to look at the global guidelines. As I say, IMDRF, for medicine, there is ICH. So all those guidelines are quite important. And as I said, many of us align with global best practices. So if you put together a dossier for a device for Nigeria, for example, what could be different is just country-specific requirements. Because we all comply with global standards, it should not be materially different. And this is a lot more established for medicines, as countries were at different stages of regulation of medical devices. But I can say with a very high level of confidence that if you submit a dossier to Nigeria, you should be able to, even though, yes, now we are ECTD, and there may be, I think there's still CTD, but in terms of the format and the information that's required, it is the same because I say we're all members of ICH, etc.
Thank you. So I don't know if there are still questions from the audience. Maybe you can unmute and ask, because I'm seeing we are running out of time. And maybe as we wait for questions, I would like to maybe invite Jeremy to maybe say a word before we break. Jeremy, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Right. Thank you very much to me and Enoch for the opportunity to say a word on behalf of the Transforming African MedTech Conference. It's my privilege to give this vote of thanks to me. Special and heartfelt thank you to the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, and specifically to you, Tumi, for joining us today. Thank you for your invaluable participation and for sharing with us such vital insights into regulatory readiness. Certainly, your presence highlights SAHPRA's commitment to fostering innovation while ensuring public safety, something that we are trying to promote. Closer relationships between innovators across the African landscape and their respective regulators, so that innovation indeed becomes a regulatory objective that is championed by both the regulators and innovators. And so, of course, for MedTech innovators that are looking to enter the South African market, the guidance that you provided today certainly provides the clarity, direction, and the confidence needed to navigate the regulatory landscape successfully. We hope that we can count on your continued collaboration, or rather this relationship between the TAMC and SAHPRA, certainly a regulator that has engaged quite actively in our last two annual conferences, and which has certainly given direction to other regulators across the continent to do the same. So we deeply appreciate your time, your expertise, and your dedication to advancing healthcare innovation across the continent. Thank you very much, Tumi.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that closing remarks. I see a hand raised, and maybe you could unmute and ask your question or seek for clarification.
Hi, this is Samson Asefa, CEO of Galani Health AI. We have a product in terms of where it fits in terms of the regulatory framework. It's a diagnostic multimodal platform which takes in SOAP notes, X-rays, lab, etc. It also has a patient outbreak automatic module, all run through retrieval augmented generation database with over 100 million diagnostic data points. However, the point I'm asking is, it is a diagnostic platform, but which works as an assistant to the doctors. So ultimately, the write-off is being done by the doctor. We have a former head of IBM running IBM Health also in it. But my question is, if it is seen as a diagnostic assistant platform, does it have to go through the same regulatory hurdles as something which is purely, it's diagnostic analysis is fully approved without any supervision? So there's sort of a dichotomy between the two paths, and I just wanted some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. No, excellent question. And we're seeing more and more of these types of assistant type technologies. And the core question that we always ask is it going to tell the doctor that this individual has cancer? or a type of cancer, or they'll tell you your platelet count is as much. If it does that, it's a diagnostic. It's a medical device. However, if let's take an example with wearables, right, where you can monitor your heart rate, etc. But it's not always used. You don't have to use it for diagnostic indications. You use it just to manage your lifestyle. In that case, it's not. So the intended use becomes ever so critical. And in this case, you know, for SAHPRA, we would say we would want to see the instruction for use, because we then need to understand what is the outcome or the output. So what is the output of this device? Does it enable the doctor to then say yes or no to a certain biochemical measurement or etc.? So not a very specific one without, you know, seeing the IFU, but I would recommend that when you submit it to the regulator, give them the IFU, then they would guide on whether it's a medical device or not.
I hope your question has been answered.
Yeah, yes, to some extent, yes. I mean, the way it works is it takes from the SOAP notes, the X-rays or MRIs, and you know, it reads all of it within the patient context, and then gives you, you know, differential diagnostic assessment with an X percentage evidence, and then either the doctor accepts it or rejects it, depending on his you know, his assessment of what the system tells you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarity. I would still give the same response.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I'm seeing we are running out of time, so I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate today's facilitator for taking your time to take us through the content that you've shared with us. We truly appreciate your presence in this meeting. And also for the audience, thank you so much for taking your time to also join in and listen to today's conversation. So moving forward, we are planning to still continue with this discussion and be on the lookout on our website, Villgro Africa website, and also African MedTech Conference website, so that you are aware of the upcoming webinars around the regulatory landscape across the continent. So thank you so much, and yeah, we can end it here.
Thank you, Enoch.